Hey everyone, my name is Aleksandra Milosevic. I'm a 3D artist currently working in a newly developed 3D art sourcing studio called Arcane Owl. Today I will be showing you how I created these assets, so this backpack for animals and parrot. Hope you learned something new, so let's get started. I started with modeling the parrot. At the very beginning, before I start the entire process, I like to have references. They can help me with the proportion and help me with the direction I should go with. When it comes to cartoonish stylized art, the key is bigger proportions, so with the parrot, bigger eyes, bigger head. As this parrot and also backpack were commission work, I received references already from the client. But it doesn't matter if it's a personal project or commission work, references are key, at least for me. The one program I use to help me have all of my references together in one place is PureRef. It's a free program. It's a tool that allows you to put images on top of your screen, so I would highly recommend it. Regarding the parrot, I only had the species that was supposed to be made and received the image with different animals already made for the game in order to see what was the style of it. So this was the image board. As this is an organic model, for me it was easier to start the modeling in ZBrush. I started with basic primitives such as sphere for the body and cylinder for the claws. I could have started with the box, it doesn't matter. The only thing that's important is getting the right block out, which includes shapes and proportions of the model. I used brushes like Move, Clay Buildup in ZBrush to get the basic shape. Also, the symmetry was on during the entire modeling, so that's shortcut X in ZBrush. I was still playing around with the proportions and shape of it. It was still messy modeling. As for the wings, I started with one feather, so just a simple cube deformed, again moved with Move brush, and also I had a subtle line in the middle using the inverted orb cracks brush. Then every feather was placed separately and then combined in one subtool. This will help me later on as I will be able to deform wings as a whole. One huge recommendation is also, if you don't have it, to download Orb's amazing brushes and also to buy and donate a bit for his amazing rendering tutorials and matcaps. I personally love his matcap. As you can see, I use them also during this project. I continue playing with the shape of the parrot. I decided it was way too chubby, so I made him longer a bit, again just with using simple brushes as Move, Standard and Clay Buildup. The beak, claws and wings are made as a separate subtool from the body, so I can manipulate them easier, and because the beak was supposed to be able to open. As he still looked a bit scary and not cute enough, I played more with the proportion with Move tool and ended up with this fellow. I was pretty much satisfied with his silhouette. He had a cutish look. In order to break the symmetry, I added 3 hair feather things. Then I activated Store the Morph Target. Under Morph Target, then store empty. This stores the geometry's position in space. So we can, for example, move the geometry, add some alphas, and say we place 3 alphas, and we don't like one particular thing. We don't have to undo everything, but rather just choose More Brush, that's shortcut BMO, and just delete the ones we don't like. One thing to note, if you store the morph target and then you dynamesh the model or subdivide it, and other similar options, you lose the previous saved morph target, so watch out for that. Okay, so as I said, I saved the morph target and started placing the feather alphas. Now, the alphas for the feathers fur were previously bought by an amazing artist called Jarrett Everson. Make sure you check them out. They're only $3.50, but they're really amazing. Now again, I activated the symmetry and started placing different alphas. When I placed something I didn't like, I used simply the morph brush and deleted it. Also, one cool thing you can do in ZBrush is you can create morph target layers. So under layers, you can create new layer, do the sculpting as before, so add alphas, move and stuff like that. When you don't like something, use the morph brush and delete it. And once you're done, you can also play around with this layer and with the intensity of it. So, for example, if you find that alphas you placed on your parrot have the big intensity, you can just decrease them by using this layer. After some time, I ended up with this model and decided he was good to go. So parrot, high poly checked. Now for the backpack, I had a little bit of a different approach. I started modeling in Blender. For me, it was easier to start in Blender as I thought I would have more control than in ZBrush. Again, I started with basic primitives, so cubes and cylinders. I just added loops and started moving vertices. Everything straightforward. I deleted half of the faces and activated the mirror modifier in order to speed up the process. For the backpack, I had a clear reference, so I just stuck to it. For every part of the backpack, I added also the subdivision modifier. I wasn't worried too much about poly count, as I would fix that in the later stages when creating the low poly and cleaning up the model for baking. So every single part of the model is just from basic primitives with added loops and moved vertices. Now the stitch. From the front pocket, I selected an edge, duplicated it and separated from the rest of the mesh. I played around a bit to get right shape and deleted some vertices. Then I selected the edge and converted it into curve. So under Object, convert to curve from mesh. Then I created a new curve. Again, I played around to get the right shape, moved it a bit and added bevel to it. Also, it is important that under Fill mode, Full is selected. I selected the first vertices from the previous curve and placed cursor to select it. I placed the pivot of the entire curve to be on the beginning. Then I selected the other curve and placed selection to cursor. This way their pivots align. I added the array modifier and curve modifier. From the drop-down, I selected the previously created curve. Now, sometimes you'll have to scale the model or play with the values of the relative offset, as it can stretch a model a bit. So, the first concept art for the backpack was close to the model I made and I have shown you. When I sent the screenshots to my client, he made some great observations and gave some amazing tips for the backpack's improvement. The silhouette didn't read completely, also the backpack was too boxy. It didn't have that organic feel. So after a few alterations, I ended up with this model. So again, the changes weren't that big, as you can see. So for the general shape of the backpack, I just moved and scaled a few vertices. I moved the lower part of the backpack to go a bit down to get that feel that something heavy is in the backpack. The straps on the sides were also made to go to the sides to give that funkier silhouette. The upper part of the backpack was given more volume so it would look like that these straps are really holding it. As I said, don't be afraid to exaggerate a bit when it comes to cartoon stylized art. And the style of the straps was changed completely. So after changing the shape of the backpack, I applied all of my modifiers and exported this model to ZBrush. Now another cool tool I like to use when I'm exporting from Blender to ZBrush or the other way around, I use GoB. It's a free Blender add-on and it allows you with just one click to export directly model from one program to another. Also, there is GoZ for exporting in the same way models from Maya or 3D Max or similar to ZBrush. So I imported the model in ZBrush, subdivided the model a bit so I could add details and added the lines on the places where the material of the backpack would stretch. So like near the stitches and stuff like that. I added these lines just by using the inverted orb cracks brush. Also, by using a simple standard brush, I added this curve on the upper part of the backpack, and again orbs brush for editing these folds. And that was pretty much the end of the high poly of the backpack. So the next thing I did was retopology and baking. For the backpack it wasn't hard as I already had a good base to start with. So I just opened the previously saved version of Blender, the ones where I haven't applied the subdivision surface modifier and models. Then I just cleaned up a bit. I deleted the modifiers and deleted some loops. As I had the specific polygon I had to stick with, I ended up making the straps on the sides as planes. This way I saved a lot on polygons. So the entire backpack had 960 triangles. Then I unwrapped the entire low poly model. I packed everything in just one UV. One add-on I really like using in Blender is called UV tools. So nowadays there are really a lot of amazing add-ons in Blender for different usage. I like using this one specific as I have been using it in previous versions in Blender also, and it helped me a lot. So as I said, there are probably a lot of them who do pretty much the same stuff, but I like using this add-on. So UV tools just help me straighten the UVs with one click. So for example, when I was unwrapping this strap, by default you get this curly strap, and by clicking on UV tools, check transmission and vertical and straighten, and it straightens your UV. Note, you have to select the edge loop in order to work properly, and also if UV sync selection is turned on, then it doesn't work. Straighter UVs are easier to pack. Also, one recommendation for packing all of the UV islands in one texture is an add-on called Shot Packer. So check that also. So I like to have the low poly and high poly of the model in the same folder, just so I could be sure that everything is named and placed properly. It is important for the low and high poly to completely align. Essentially, what you are doing with baking is you're transferring the details of the high poly model onto the low poly. Good practice is also importing decimated ZBrush models so you could easily manipulate with them in Blender. I'll explain the funny colors in a bit. So firstly, as you can see, the low and high poly completely align to one another. The backpack isn't perfectly mirrored because of the stretches, as you can see, so I had to bake both of the sides of the model. As for the straps, they are completely the same, so I deleted half of them and added them just after baking. I like to have all different parts separate. So I have to check that and make sure that all of the parts of low poly have the exact name as high poly. The only difference is in the ending low or high. Regarding the funny colors, they are representing my ID map after baking. So my, for example, cloth, low poly, doesn't have the meshes like these bands. Regarding the geometry, it only has this cylinder, so I'm going to bake these details onto it. So, for example, after baking, if I want to color the bands differently from the rest of the cloth, I can just use my ID map and easily select the part of the mesh I need. So, this is just one mesh, and the goal is to color them as different as possible. I usually use complementary colors for one mesh. When you bake a mesh onto a plane in high poly, you also have to have a plane, so when placing an opacity map, you can easily select the part which is going to be masked. I selected the entire high poly and exported as backpack high, and selected afterwards the low poly and exported as backpack low. Backpack was ready for baking. As for the parrot, making the low poly was a bit more complicated. As the parrot is the character and it is going to be animated, I had to keep an eye on the topology. So it had to have the proper loops around its legs, wings, head. Also, the number of triangles was supposed to be around 1000 triangles. I didn't have a starting point on low poly like with backpack. I exported the high poly from ZBrush and imported it in Blender. At first, I tried reducing the number of polygons using the ZRemesher and that way making the low poly. In the end, it was easier and faster for me just to create low poly from scratch, using again basic primitives in Blender. I just moved vertices and took in consideration to place the correct loops. One modifier that really helped me is shrink wrap in Blender. As I said, I had the high poly imported in Blender. While I was modeling low poly, I had the entire time shrink wrap modifier on. What he does is he allows an object to shrink to the surface of another object. From the drop-down menu, high poly of the body of the parrot was selected. When I was satisfied with the results, I applied the modifier. I only modeled half of the parrot, as I said previously, because he is symmetrical. I also unwrapped only one half of the model. After unwrapping, I applied the mirror modifier. I selected the entire body of the parrot and merged vertices by distance. In order for me to be able to bake the entire model with already mirrored sides, I had to select the UVs from mirrored geometry and move the UVs by a value of 1 to the side. This way I was able to avoid some artifacts. I did this with all the remaining parts of the parrot and ended up with this model. I triangulated the entire model before exporting it for baking. As with the backpack, I had to make sure that all of the parts of high poly have the same name as low poly. Again, I added materials with different colors to high poly for creating the ID map. Once I checked and made sure everything is properly placed, I exported separately high and low poly. Parrot was ready for baking. I did my baking in Substance Painter. I selected a new project. Under File, I selected my low poly model. I changed the name of the material and then clicked Bake Mesh Maps. Now at the beginning I usually just bake the normal map without any anti-aliasing in order to check if everything is okay with the model. So I unchecked everything else except the normal map. I changed the match from always to by mesh name so that the right high poly mesh will be baked onto the right low poly mesh. Change the output size to 2K and pick the high poly from which I will bake the details to the low poly model. And I clicked bake. There were some minor issues. I had to change my max frontal distance and max rear distance in order to fix the artifacts. I only increased the value a bit apart from default 0.01. As everything seemed okay, I baked again the normal map, but this time I put the anti-aliasing to subsampling 4x4, and I baked again. Then I baked everything else. In ID map, I checked the color source from vertex color to material color because the high poly mesh has material on it. In curvature map, I unchecked enable seams. I also checked in ambient occlusion self-occlusion to only same mesh maps as the parrot will be animated and say, for example, his beak is going to be animated and the dark bark with his ambient occlusion map will not render correctly. And I baked everything again. I got this result. So normal map, this is the ID map. As you can see, the colors are the same as they were on the high poly. Parrot was ready for texturing. Now I only used for this particular project base color, so I didn't need rough or metallic maps. So in my viewport, I only selected the base color. You could select it by clicking on the letter C, or just by clicking here and changing it to base color. So after baking, my base color was looking like this, so it didn't have any information. I started with just editing some basic coloring. So firstly, I added color to the body of the parrot. Now there is a tool that I love to use called So Much Diffuse. So it's basically a collection of material generators for Substance Painter. I usually use this tool as a good starting point of texturing. So when you add this material, you can essentially change the preset. Then after selecting the preset, you can change the diffuse color, then all sorts of stuff. Like change the shadow color, change the shadow spread, then in gradients you can change cavity and so on. You can also enable specular, change the angle of the light. Now for the purpose of this project I disabled the specular. I just added a light variation of colors yellow and red. Now I'm going to show you the use of ID maps. So say I added this material to the body of the parrot. Now the body of the parrot consists of wings and tails also, but I don't want for them to have the same material and color as the rest of the body. I simply apply a black mask onto the layer. Now no UVs have this layer. I click the mask with the right click and added mask with color selection. There I clicked pick color and selected only the part of the model which I wanted to have this material, and that's it. You can also play around with hardness and tolerance to get the better results. So I did this with pretty much every part of the body. I use mask with color selection and material So Much Diffuse to get the basic colors. I got this result. Now this was just the base color. As I was not quite satisfied with the amount of details I got from the maps, I decided to export all of the maps and play with them a bit in Photoshop and 3D Code. I could have done this also in Substance Painter, but as I was more familiar and comfortable with the painting tools in 3D Code, I switched to that program. As I said, I exported the maps. For me, the ones that were important were curvature map, ambient occlusion, and the base color I got with using So Much Diffuse material. I opened the new project, imported the low poly. There, under Textures, Import, I imported firstly the external curvature, then external AO, and at the end, Color Albedo Map. Curvature Map had a standard blending mode. I played around with opacity and ended up leaving it at 60%. Then AO's blending mode was Multiply, while the blending mode for the base color was set to Hard Light. After that, I just started painting a bit, editing colors where I thought it needed, always looking at the reference. In this case, how the species of the parrot looks like and which colors are its wings. I got a few layers like yellow whiter on the wings, then added some red color. I painted the eyes to have the cute look. At the end, I calculated occlusion in 3D code, cleaned it up a bit, and reduced the opacity. When I was satisfied with the general look of the parrot, I exported the texture from 3D code and imported it again in Substance Painter. Now I imported this texture I got from 3D code as a base color. I created a new fill layer, added this texture to color material and changed its blending mode to color. I wanted to add some subtle shadows to the material. I duplicated this layer and changed its blending mode to pass through. Right-click on the layer and I added a filter. I selected from the drop-down menu Baked Lighting Stylized Filter. Now I changed the output to diffuse only and started playing with other values to get the result I like. I changed the color of the sun and then I reduced its intensity and changed the angles. I ended up with this result and thought it looked good enough. Parrot was done. So the process of baking for the backpack was the same as for the baking of the parrot. After baking, I got these maps. I started texturing by adding the Substance Painter Smart material called Leather Stylized. I changed the colors in the layers and played with the value in them. Then I reduced the opacity of this material. Under the Leather Stylized material, I added so much diffuse layer. This layer will give the highlights to the backpack. So this was the backpack without this layer and this is with it. The highlights gave the backpack the leather feel. Next thing I did is just pick the top of the backpack and color it with fill layer. Then I added the gold parts of the backpack by again editing the so much diffuse material. I also used the Baked ID map to just pick the specific parts of the mesh to be gold. So to the straps of the backpack, leather stylized material was added again, but I just decided to change the values of this material a bit. So I gave them a lighter brown color. Again, by using ID map, I was able to pick parts of the backpack I wanted with this value of brown. And the process was the same for the pockets. Now in Substance Painter, when you're looking only the base color, you can't see the opacity maps. I switched the mode to see the model with lighting in order to see the alpha. I needed just the base color as I did for the parrot, so I didn't play with the rough values of the model. In order to get the opacity, I created firstly a group and selected the part of the mesh with alphas, so I selected just the plane. Then, in that group, I created a fill layer, added mask with color selection, and picked the color of the part of the mesh which is going to be hidden, so this color. Then I put opacity map to be black, have this value 0, so to be hidden. That part won't be seen. Then I created another fill layer. I also added mask with color selection, but this time selected the colors from the meshes that are going to be visible. I placed the opacity map to have the value 1, so to be white, so to be visible. At the very end, as I had some minor mistakes, I imported the texture in Photoshop, cleaned the artifacts, play around with saturation, and ended up with this model. That pretty much wraps this tutorial. I hope this was helpful and I taught you something new. Thank you for watching.